Hi you guys, and welcome back to my channel. As you probably saw the title of this video, you know why you're here. I know this case has been done by literally everyone. It's been done by every show I can think of that deals with true crime. It's been covered by Dateline, 48 Hours, ABC 2020. A lot of YouTubers have talked about this case, but I still wanted to do it because I think that every person who is interested in true crime has that one case that they just need to see solved in their lifetime. And for me, that is this case. There is so much evidence in this case. There was over 60,000 pieces of evidence in this case, and I strongly believe that there was too much evidence to solve this case. I know a lot of people are probably looking at me like, why would she say that? How is that even a thing? But I think there was just so much evidence that it made everything so confusing, and there was just so many bizarre actions that people made. It was just such a bizarre case, and so that is why today I wanted to do the case of JONBENET Ramsey. JONBENET Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990 to John and Patsy Ramsey in Atlanta, Georgia. She had an older brother named Burke and 3 half-siblings from John's first marriage. A lot of people wonder why JONBENET has the name that she does because it's quite a unique name. What her parents did was they basically named her after them. So they took John's first name and his middle name and put a French twist on his middle name, hence JONBENET, and obviously Patricia was after her mother. The family moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1991. And at the time, John was the president and CEO of Axis Graphics, which was a computer services company. The family lived in a beautiful upscale neighborhood in a 15-room Tudor-style brick mansion. The Ramseys often hosted events with as many as 50 guests, and just days before JONBENET was killed, the family had participated in a holiday walkthrough of their home. The mansions in their neighborhood were on display for Christmas, and it's estimated that hundreds of people walked through the Ramsey home for a tour. Now, I know that seems like it's kind of a weird fact to put in this video as I'm introducing the family and the home, but as I'm talking about the home, I wanted to definitely point that out because I will come back to that tour later on in the video. JONBENET was said to have been full of energy and full of life. According to those that knew her, she was extremely friendly and outgoing. She was very sweet to all of the other kids at her school. She was known to share her toys with them. And although JONBENET was very bubbly and had an extremely outgoing, friendly, upbeat personality, she also was known to have a very observant and curious side. Detective Steve Thomas, who worked on JONBENET's case, described her as being very interested in listening to adult conversation. She was very attentive and had a very strong vocabulary and a very strong sense of logic. She also had a very strong sense of self, and on a family vacation in Charlevoix, JONBENET was running around the dock barefoot, and her Aunt Pam asked her to put on her shoes, to which JONBENET replied, "I want to feel the rhythm of the earth underneath my feet." Unfortunately, if you look up JONBENET, you will find tons of articles that talk about her beauty, which JONBENET was an absolutely stunningly beautiful child. But I really wanted to talk about that other side of JONBENET, the playful little 6-year-old side of JONBENET that often isn't seen in the articles. Oftentimes when you look up articles on JONBENET, you'll also see that she was heavily involved in child beauty pageants, which she was. JONBENET's involvement in pageants had a lot to do with her mother Patsy, who was a beauty queen herself. She was actually crowned Miss West Virginia in 1977, and so JONBENET definitely wanted to kind of take after her mother's footsteps, and Patsy was more than happy to help guide JONBENET through the process. JONBENET won her first beauty pageant at just 4 years old. She went on to win Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Charlevoix, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, America's Royal Miss, Miss Colorado Sunburst, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. So for a 6-year-old, that is quite a bit. JONBENET was only on the child beauty pageant circuit for 2 years, and she'd already taken home a lot of titles. Due to the number of pageants that JONBENET was in, she was often in dance classes and vocal lessons. She had her hair dyed bleach blonde and was often seen in full makeup. She was also in a lot of professional photo shoots and was usually in customized outfits. Patsy was definitely big on keeping up appearances and was known to be a little bit controlling. She was known to have matched outfits with her daughter, which is of course a little bit odd, and always wanted everything to look absolutely perfect. From the outside, JONBENET always was very put together. However, underneath this picture of perfection were a lot of problems that I will tap back into later on in this video. The Ramseys were extremely social and were in very affluent circles in the Boulder community. They loved hosting gatherings and they loved being around a lot of people, and this was no different in December of 1996. It was a month full of holiday parties, and the Ramseys actually hosted a party themselves on December 23rd, just 2 days before JONBENET would last be seen alive. This should have been a fun party. It was full of people, a lot of JONBENET's friends were there, and even Santa was there. Of course, it wasn't really Santa. Underneath the costume and performance was 67-year-old Bill McReynolds, who had played Santa at the Ramseys' previous parties. I just want to make a note of that name because I will be coming back to it later on in the video. JONBENET should have been having fun at this party. However, she wasn't her normal, bubbly, outgoing self. In fact, one family friend saw JONBENET on a stairwell by herself, looking really sad and withdrawn. When she asked her what was wrong, JONBENET replied and said, "I don't feel pretty." Now, this is extremely weird for a 6-year-old to say. This is the holiday season. She's about to get a lot of presents, so it's very interesting that she was caught up in this idea of beauty. It was never publicly released if the family friend asked JONBENET what she meant by that, or if she ever explained why she felt that way. Another extremely important fact about this party is that a 911 call was actually placed. When the dispatcher answered, the caller immediately hung up. So when police arrived at the home following procedures, Susan Stein, a friend of Patsy Ramsey's, answered the door, and she said that it was a mistake. The cops asked if they could come in to check the house, and she declined and said no. It is still to this day unknown who made that phone call or why that phone call was made. The question I have here is, could that 911 call be connected to JONBENET being so sad? Who made that phone call? On the evening of Christmas Day in 1996, the Ramsey family went to the White's Christmas dinner party. At that party, JONBENET seemed fine, she was playing with the other friends, and everyone said that the family looked normal and happy. Later that evening, the Ramseys left the party somewhat early because they were planning to leave for a family trip the next morning to Charlevoix. On the way home, they decided to drop off some gifts to friends, and at that time, they said that JONBENET had fallen asleep in the car. After they dropped the gifts off at their friend's home, they headed back to their place, and when they arrived back home, they said that they immediately took JONBENET up to her room. They said that she did not wake up this entire time. John said he set her down on the bed, and Patsy proceeded to undress her down to the knit top she was wearing, and she put long bottoms on her and put her to bed. According to John, when they got home, Burke refused to go to sleep right away because he wanted to play with one of his new gifts. So John agreed to help Burke set up this toy, and after that, he was sent to bed. During this time, Patsy was preparing for the trip the next day. According to Detective Steve Thomas, who was on the case, she wasn't particularly excited about the trip. It had been a long holiday season. She'd been hosting a lot of parties. Obviously, she was tired from Christmas and all of the events of that day, and she was sitting and packing and still wrapping gifts late into the evening. After she was done wrapping gifts, John and Patsy said that they went to bed and were asleep for the rest of the night. Early the next morning on December 26th at around 5:30 a.m., John woke up and took a shower to start to get ready for the day. Shortly after, Patsy awoke as well, and she began to apply her makeup. She also put on the outfit she was wearing from the night before, which is extremely odd because Patsy was all about appearances. So it's very interesting that she wore the exact same outfit as the day before. At around 5:45, Patsy said she walked down the spiral staircase to grab some coffee, and on the way down, she noticed 3 pieces of paper that were neatly laid out on the staircase. It was the infamous ransom note. Patsy said she picked up the note and read the first couple of sentences. She didn't even read the rest of it. She just saw that JONBENET had been kidnapped and immediately called for JONBENET, screamed, and ran up the staircase to check on JONBENET. Unfortunately, JONBENET was not in her room. John heard the commotion and he ran down from their 3rd floor bedroom and met Patsy in the stairwell on the 2nd floor, where they both went to go check on Burke, who was still asleep in his room. After that, John went downstairs to actually read the ransom note while Patsy called 911. The ransom note had said that JONBENET had been kidnapped and the kidnappers were demanding $118,000, which was odd because it was around the exact same amount of John's Christmas bonus that year. Officers arrived 8 minutes later, and while they were en route, for some reason Patsy decided to call Fleet and Priscilla White and John and Barbara Fernie, who were close friends of her and John's. There was no reason for Patsy to do this, and it was just the first weird decision that the Ramseys made that particular day. Officer Rick French was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene. He immediately read the ransom note and began to search the house for a point of entry from the intruder. He didn't find anything, and he went down into the basement as well and searched the entire basement, but failed to look into the wine cellar room that was kind of off to the side in the basement. Shortly after that, Fleet and Priscilla White arrived, and within 10 to 15 minutes of them arriving, Fleet immediately went down into the basement to search for JONBENET. He went into Burke's train room and saw that one of the windows had been broken and a suitcase was placed right underneath it, almost as if someone had used it as a stepping stool to get in and out of the window. He went back over to where the wine cellar room was, and he said he opened the door and didn't see anything in there. Within an hour of police arriving at the home, John was supposedly on the phone calling his personal pilot, trying to arrange a flight out of Boulder immediately. Why? I'm not quite sure. This is another odd decision that the Ramseys made that day. I have no idea why John would want to leave the state right after his daughter has been kidnapped and is most likely in the state still. I feel like most parents would want to be near where their child would be possibly returned and wouldn't want to leave the area. Throughout the next few hours, more of the Ramseys' friends continued to arrive, and they were allowed to walk freely around the house. The house is literally a crime scene at this point. A young girl has been kidnapped, and the police officers allow them to walk around the house at will. They were able to go wherever they wanted. Some of them even cleaned up the kitchen, which was possible evidence. I will still to this day never understand why the police did this, why they weren't more why they didn't take more control over the crime scene. That's the number one thing you do in an investigation. If someone's been taken or harmed, you want to seal off the crime scene. You want to make sure that you aren't letting the evidence be contaminated, and they actually didn't even seal off JONBENET's room until around 10:30 a.m., which is about 4 hours after police first arrived. It's also important to note how John and Patsy were acting that day and how they were not. According to Officer French, they did not want to be around each other and were often in separate rooms. John appeared to be kind of cool, calm, and collected. At one point, he was seen checking his mail, while Patsy was at times sobbing hysterically and at other times was sitting lifelessly in a chair. He did say that Patsy was staring at him the whole time, which he found to be extremely odd. At one point, he looked over at Patsy and she apparently had her hands up to her face as she was crying, but he saw that her eyes were peering through her fingers at him. So again, very weird behavior, and he definitely made a note of it while he was in the home. At around 7 a.m., Burke was taken out of the home and was taken to the White family home. And at around 8 a.m., Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the Ramsey house. The ransom note said that the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m., and when 10 a.m. had come and gone, Detective Linda Arndt definitely made a note of that because no one in the house seemed to notice that 10 a.m. was gone. So if your daughter had been kidnapped and they gave a specific time frame of 8 to 10 and you still hadn't heard from them, I would assume that you would be completely panicked. You'd wonder if your daughter was okay. You would wonder if the kidnapper had decided to just kill her. I mean, there was literally no reaction, and Detective Arndt really picked up on that and made a note. She also noticed as time went by that people in the home were becoming more and more restless, specifically John Ramsey. So she, I think, was overwhelmed in the situation. She was trying to control the scene. A lot of people have criticized her actions that day by letting people walk around the home. But again, she was the only detective really on the scene that day, and she was trying to control all of these people. She called for backup many times, and she received no relief. So later on in the day, in an effort to distract John, she asked John and his friend Fleet to search the house from top to bottom to see if anything was missing or out of place, if anything looked odd. She also specifically said not to touch anything. Before she could even finish her request, John bolted straight to the basement. First of all, she said from top to bottom. John went straight to the bottom into the basement and into Burke's train room. Fleet was right behind him, and John mentioned the window. When Fleet asked about the window, John said that he actually broke the window the summer before when he had locked himself out of the home. He then motioned to the suitcase and kind of told Fleet that was interesting looking, and then he went immediately to the wine cellar room. And according to Fleet, when he opened the door, he screamed before even turning on the light. So again, that's very odd because the wine cellar room was extremely dark. There was no windows, so how could he see something and scream when the light wasn't even turned on yet? Regardless, it was there that JONBENET's body was found. She was found dressed in a white knit shirt and long underwear with duct tape over her mouth. A garrote made of white cord and a broken artist's paintbrush handle was around her neck, and there was cord around her right wrist. Her body was covered with a white blanket from her bed, and nearby was a nightgown, which one relative described as her favorite possession. JONBENET had also been sexually assaulted. Now, going against Detective Arndt's request, John immediately went to the body, ripped off the duct tape, and began to try and untie her arms. And according to Detective Arndt, holding her with both hands at the waist the way you would hold a doll, carried her upstairs and laid her on the hardwood floor in the living room. Detective Arndt immediately told him to set her down and to step back. She then took JONBENET and put her by the Christmas tree. John followed her, and it was there that Detective Arndt described a very odd encounter with John Ramsey. She later gave an interview and described what she saw.
And I see John Ramsey carrying JONBENET up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And JONBENET was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put JONBENET down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me. And his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911. And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up. I'd said everything made sense in that instance. And I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was well-founded?
You bet I do. There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day?
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
In the midst of all this, Patsy heard the commotion and entered the room. She immediately was hysterical and collapsed right on top of JONBENET and reportedly said, "Jesus, you raised Lazarus from the dead. Please raise my baby." Following the discovery of JONBENET's body, detectives immediately wanted to talk to the Ramseys. They wanted to know about her actions leading up to her death. They wanted to know what the family had been doing, which is totally normal in an investigation. They want to talk to the people that are closest to the victim. They want to get a better idea of where the victim could have met somebody that wanted to do them harm, and so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. However, the Ramseys refused, just flat out refused to talk to them, and that exact day, John actually hired a lawyer. Soon after, Patsy hired lawyers, and they both had separate lawyer teams. At one point, the police wanted to talk to Lucinda, John's first wife, who wasn't even in Boulder. She was in a different state, so there was no way that she even knew anything about the crime scene. And when John found out about that, he hired a lawyer for her as well. Shortly after JONBENET was murdered, the family moved back to Atlanta, Georgia. And on January 1st, they did another interesting move. The Ramseys decided that they wanted to go on national television on CNN to do an interview to talk about the murder of their daughter and ask the public for help. Now, this isn't out of the ordinary in normal circumstances. A lot of parents will do this, of course. They want the public's, to see if they know anything. The best thing is to get the information of the case out there to the public. However, the problem is that the Ramseys hadn't even talked to the police yet. So the police were extremely concerned. Why were the Ramseys out talking to the public but not talking to them? They were literally trying to find who killed their daughter. At one point, Governor Rick Owens actually publicly called the Ramseys out and said that they needed to come forward and stop hiding behind their lawyers. This was just the beginning of a long battle between the Ramseys and the police. When the Ramseys finally agreed to sit down to a formal interview, it had been 4 months since JONBENET had been murdered. I repeat, 4 months. That is literally insane. I have no idea why they would do that. Like, if you're trying to find your daughter, why would you refuse to talk to the police for 4 months? And apparently when they finally agreed to sit down with the police, their lawyers had specific requests. They wanted the questions beforehand, and they actually requested that the Boulder police weren't even in the room while they were doing the interview.
I'm talking about scientific evidence.
I don't give a flying flip how scientific it is.
go back to the damn drawing board.
They of course maintained their innocence when they sat down in the interviews. They said that they had nothing to do with JONBENET's death and that an intruder definitely entered their home. They began to point the finger at Bill McReynolds, who played Santa at their parties, as well as a lot of their close friends, which alarmed their close friends. They had no idea why John and Patsy would be literally pointing fingers at every single person that they knew in their lives. When the police asked them to take polygraphs, John and Patsy had extremely different answers. Patsy said that she'd be more than happy to take them. She said, in fact, that she would take 10 of them, while John said that he'd be insulted. So again, very different reactions, and in the end, both of them refused to take any polygraph that was administered by the FBI. The Ramseys agreed to take their own privately administered polygraphs. The Ramseys approached the first polygrapher, Gene Parker, and he insisted on doing a drug test, which is kind of normal in procedures, and for him that was part of his procedure. He wanted to do a drug test before taking the polygraph. When the Ramseys found out about this, they decided to go elsewhere. The Ramseys took polygraphs with Jerry Torriello, and the polygraphs came out inconclusive, and again, the Ramseys went elsewhere. Finally, the Ramseys took polygraphs with polygrapher Ed Gelb and passed, and this was the result that they announced far and wide to the public. So as we all know, polygraphs aren't the most solid and reliable source of evidence. It's very easy to fail a polygraph when you're telling the truth. It's very easy to pass one when you're being deceptive, and in some states they're not even allowed in a court of law. So it's not really the polygraph results that kind of caught me off guard. It was more the behavior of the Ramseys. It was how they wanted to control who conducted them and how they went to so many different people until they got the results that they specifically wanted. When a psychologist interviewed JONBENET's brother Burke a few weeks after her murder, he seemed very withdrawn and showed very little emotion. The psychologist asked him to draw a picture of his family, and Burke didn't even include JONBENET, which was extremely odd. Sure, JONBENET was now gone, but he had spent 6 years of his life with her, and it just seemed very odd to investigators that so soon after her murder he would literally just not put her in the family photo. Police did take an interest in Burke because in their initial investigation they found out that Burke had actually hit JONBENET with a golf club, which resulted in a permanent scar on her face. A psychologist also asked Burke in the interview how he thought his sister had died, and he said,
You feel? What do you think? I think that someone took her very quietly and put her down in the basement. And then they took her knife out and something back. And maybe a hammer in her head.
The Ramseys were asked to give handwriting samples, which they agreed to do, and they were able to rule out all the Ramseys except for Patsy. When I looked at the writing samples and I looked at the ransom note, it was extremely obvious, to me at least, that there was a lot of similarities in the writing. Again, there is heated debate on this. Some experts in the field say that there is no comparison between the two, that it's clearly two different writers, but there are also a lot of experts in the field that do say that there are a lot of consistencies between Patsy's writing and the ransom note. Throughout it all, the Ramseys continued to maintain their innocence. However, when the police began to really look at the evidence and investigate the crime scene, they noticed that a lot of holes were coming up in the Ramsey story and that a lot of it just didn't make any sense. I'm going to start with JONBENET's autopsy again because there's just so much evidence in this case. JONBENET's autopsy revealed that she had pineapple in her stomach, which wasn't digested, which means that she had eaten it shortly before her death. Now, this is extremely crucial in the case because John and Patsy have said over and over again that JONBENET did not wake up that evening, that when she got home she was taken straight to bed. So this means either that John and Patsy were lying and that JONBENET did have pineapple at some point in the evening. It's very possible that they didn't see her get the pineapple but that she was still up at some point, or it means that the intruder gave it to her. John and Patsy definitely honed in on the pineapple and said that it was clear proof that an intruder was in the home because they themselves did not give JONBENET the pineapple. However, when the police looked at the house, on the table where Burke normally sat, there was a bowl of pineapple accompanied by a glass of tea. Now, when they did further analysis, it was revealed that they found fingerprints from Burke and Patsy on the items, and they did not find any unidentified DNA on them. They also did not find JONBENET's prints on the bowl or on the glass either. In the autopsy, it had appeared that JONBENET had been wiped down and redressed. Now, the underwear that she was redressed in were several sizes too large for her. They literally would have fallen off of her body if she had stood up, which is extremely interesting again. On her underwear was DNA from an unidentified male. It was determined that JONBENET had not only been strangled, but that she had received a massive blow to the head from an unidentified object. This blow created a fracture in her skull and did not have an opening, so all of the bleeding was internal. She had 2 circular marks on her neck, and there was evidence of sexual assault. It's important to note that the medical examiner determined that JONBENET had at least one other incident of sexual abuse prior to her death. There's been some debate on this, but several experts agree that there had been evidence of chronic abuse. Several experts, including Cyril Wecht, I might have pronounced that wrong, who is a highly consulted forensic pathologist, along with 4 other doctors, said that they believe that there was chronic abuse to JONBENET. Dr. Richard Kirshner of the University of Chicago's Pathology Department went so far as to say if she had been taken to a hospital emergency room and doctors had seen the genital evidence, her father would have been arrested. Obviously, this was alarming to the police. If JONBENET was being sexually assaulted, who was doing it? When the police began to look at evidence aside from the autopsy, they began to notice a lot of bizarre things. First off was the ransom note. And the number one thing that stood out to investigators and the majority of the public when it was released was how long it was. Usually ransom notes are written quickly, are short, and are to the point. They usually consist of 50 to 65 words, and JONBENET's ransom note was about 3 pages long and around 385 words. So very long and not consistent with what investigators usually see with ransom notes. Also on top of that, a lot of the ransom note just didn't make sense. The person who wrote it described themselves as being a part of a foreign faction. Who would describe themselves in that way? It just is so bizarre. They also threatened to behead JONBENET, and investigators said that the tone of the note was literally what you would kind of hear in a movie. It took on tones of what you might see in pop culture in a movie or something like that. And even one line in the ransom note was taken directly from the movie Speed. Whoever wrote the note ended it by saying SBTC victory. Of course, this stumped investigators and they were wondering what that could have meant, and a lot of web sleuthers online were wondering what that meant, and a lot of them have put a lot of theories out there. I, in my opinion, believe the one that was the most obvious one, and is what I think investigators initially thought was the case, was that SBTC stood for Saved by the Cross, with victory right behind it. The Ramseys were devout Christians, and I believe that it's possible that it could have been saved by the cross since they were victorious through Jesus Christ. To me, that makes the most sense. When the investigators wrote the notes themselves to see how long it might have taken for the perpetrator to write it, it took them 20 minutes to do. And this is when they knew what they were writing. Imagine going into it and not knowing what you're going to write and kind of just rambling on and on and on. It would take probably way more than 20 minutes. So whoever wrote this note had a long time to write it. Also, as I mentioned before, the demand in the ransom note was for $118,000, which was around the exact amount of John's Christmas bonus. Again, the investigators wondered why they would ask for such a small amount of money when the Ramseys were essentially millionaires. Also, upon further analysis, it was revealed that the ransom note was written with a notepad and a pen from the Ramsey home. They also found a piece of paper crumpled up in the trash, and on that piece of paper was the beginning of the ransom note, so it was evident that whoever had wrote it had messed up on their first try, had thrown that one away, and had started over again. It also didn't help the situation that investigators could not rule Patsy out as being the author of the note. The next odd thing about this case was the 911 call that Patsy made when she found the ransom note. As I said before, John and Patsy have continuously said that Burke was asleep in his room and that he did not come out of his room until he was taken to the White home. However, when they enhanced the phone call, you could clearly hear 3 voices in the background after Patsy thought she'd already hung up. Since there were only 4 people in the house and one of them was missing at that time, they're able to figure out that it was most likely John, Patsy, and Burke that were talking. When they enhanced the phone call, they were actually able to pick out sentences and some words that they believe were said during that conversation. And I'm going to let you listen to it now. If you want to hear it for better quality, please feel free to look it up on YouTube. It is readily available for you. Found a dictionary open to the word incest. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to about this case did not know about this, and I was really in the weeds a while ago with this case when I found this out. But apparently when they went in to investigate the home, there was a dictionary opened up with the word incest. When Detective Steve Thomas saw the picture of it at the crime scene, he said that he immediately almost fell out of his chair. He said, A picture showed a Webster dictionary on a coffee table in the first floor study with the corner of the lower left-hand page sharply creased and pointing like an arrow to the word incest. This is extremely weird. Why would anyone in the household be wondering what the literal definition of the word incest means? I highly doubt Burke, who was just 9 years old at the time, would even know what that word meant. At 9 years old, I certainly would have no idea what it meant, and if I did for whatever reason, I definitely wouldn't want to take time out of my day to go to the dictionary and look it up. So to me, it's pretty evident that it was either John and Patsy that were looking up that word. This is also concerning when you think about the autopsy and the experts that believe JonBenet was being sexually assaulted. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, from the outside, JonBenet appeared to be absolutely perfect and completely put together, but that there were problems underneath. And JonBenet, unfortunately, during this time was having massive problems with bedwetting and with soiling her bed. The family housekeeper said at one point that it was so bad that she was constantly washing JonBenet's sheets and that she constantly had sheets ready because it was happening so often. This again is unsettling because of the autopsy report and all of the experts saying that JonBenet had been sexually assaulted, in addition to them finding the dictionary open to the word incest. Holly Smith, the head of the Boulder County sexual abuse team, said that she had found fecal matter in all of JonBenet's underwear on the third day of the investigation. In 2006, she said, "There is this dynamic of children that have been sexually abused, sometimes soiling themselves or urinating in their beds to keep someone who is hurting them at bay." So again, who exactly was sexually abusing JonBenet? How did they have access to her so easily? And were the bedwetting issues that she was having linked to this possible sexual abuse? At the crime scene, they were able to identify the paintbrush in the garage as being that of Patsy Ramsey's, and the rope was also found in the home. Essentially everything that the intruder used was from the family home, from the actual ransom note to the actual crime scene. It is still undetermined what instrument delivered that final blow to JonBenet, but investigators all have their own theories, and they also believe that it was from the home. There was also extensive fiber evidence found at the scene. Patsy's clothing fibers from the jacket she was wearing the night before and the morning of were found underneath the duct tape on JonBenet's mouth, tied into the garrote knot, and in the paint tray where the paintbrush was taken to create the handle in the garrote. And I believe there were even fibers from John's shirt and the underwear that she was redressed in. Now this is important because the underwear was underneath her long bottoms, so it's impossible for that fiber to get into her underwear when he picked her up, because again, she was wearing those long bottoms. So he picked her up and the underwear was underneath that, and somehow his shirt fibers were in her underwear. The Boulder police weren't just focusing on the Ramseys. By October of 1997, they had over 1,600 people in their index of persons of interest. The unknown DNA found on JonBenet's underwear did not match any of the suspects or persons of interest that they had. They also ran the DNA through the national database, and there was absolutely no matches. So this means that the owner of the DNA and whoever harmed JonBenet had never done a crime before or after, because I would assume that their DNA would be in the database, and they have put it in the database and searched multiple times over the years, and there has never been a match. Despite looking into multiple theories and suspects, the police believe that there was sufficient evidence to charge John and Patsy Ramsey. On March 12, 1998, the Boulder Police Department asked the DA to take the case to a grand jury, which they did. In 1999, the grand jury returned an indictment to charge the Ramseys. However, on October 13, 1999, the DA announced that there wasn't enough evidence, and he absolutely dropped the entire case. The case quickly hit a dead end, and it led to a lot of investigators actually resigning from their jobs. No new lead surfaced, and over the years, JonBenet's case gradually fell out of the spotlight. In June 24th of 2006, Patsy Ramsey actually passed away at the age of 49 from ovarian cancer. Around 2 months later, on August 16, 2006, John Mark Carr, a 41-year-old American school teacher, confessed to the crime. He was arrested in Bangkok, Thailand before coming back to the United States. When his DNA was compared to the DNA found at the crime scene, it was not a match, and the police said that he had nothing to do with JonBenet's death. On October 25, 2013, the indictment from the grand jury in 1999 was officially released to the public, and it showed that they charged the Ramseys of 2 counts each of child abuse resulting in death in connection to the first-degree murder of JonBenet. I'll repeat. 2 counts each of child abuse resulting in death in connection to the first-degree murder of JonBenet. So to me, that makes it pretty evident who the police thought and who that particular grand jury thought committed the crime. The case is currently still an open case and is back in the hands of the Boulder Police Department. Now it's time for the theories, and there really are only two main theories when it comes to who killed JonBenet. The first theory, which was heavily backed by Detective Lou Smith, is that an intruder entered the home and killed JonBenet. In this theory, it's most likely that the intruder entered the home through the basement window that John had broken the summer before while the Ramseys were at the White's Christmas party that evening. I'm assuming that the killer needed time to get a general layout of the home. He needed time to write the ransom note. He needed to find the notepad and pen. He also needed to find the supplies for the garage. So he definitely needed a lot of time to get everything ready. He could have done all of this while the Ramseys were home. To me, that doesn't seem likely. There would just be too high of a possibility of him being caught. So I definitely think that he did it before the Ramseys were home and was somehow hiding. I don't think he did everything while the Ramseys were in the home and asleep. After the parents were asleep, it's theorized that the killer went into JonBenet's room and maybe offered her pineapple as a way to get her downstairs. He would have given her pineapple and somehow known that pineapple was her favorite snack and would have taken her down into the basement where I am assuming something went horribly wrong. I don't know if he even intended to truly kidnap JonBenet, but if he did botch his own kidnapping, why would he leave the ransom note? It just doesn't really make any sense. I feel like if you messed up your kidnapping and you're going to leave the body there, why would you even leave the note? I feel like you'd want to take every trace of yourself out. Even if you would disguise your handwriting, I feel like you would still want to take that out and not leave it there for evidence. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. And also, why would he try to go back down into the basement and exit from the way that he came? That window is extremely small, and it would have been extremely difficult to get JonBenet up through it without JonBenet putting up a horrible fight and also getting himself back up with JonBenet. A lot of people have theorized, and Detective Lou Smith has said that a stun gun was used on JonBenet because it could have matched the two marks that were found on her body. So I guess that is a possibility, but again, why would he try to go into the basement area? I feel like he could have just taken her out through one of the normal doors of the house. It would have been a lot easier and quicker. Whatever happened in the basement, it was then that he either delivered the head blow to JonBenet or strangled her. The investigators do not know which one came first. Either one could have come first according to the autopsy, and he sexually assaulted JonBenet and killed her. After killing JonBenet, the intruder would have had to wipe down her body and redress her. He would have put her in the blanket and left her favorite nightgown nearby. So to me, obviously there is a lot wrong with this theory. The couple of things I just mentioned about him leaving the note, him redressing her. I don't feel like a perpetrator that doesn't know the victim would go to that length of redressing JonBenet and putting her favorite nightgown nearby. It just seems like that would not be something that somebody who just committed such a heinous act would do. Also, if there was an intruder, why wouldn't he just bring a weapon with him? Why would he just rely on what was in the Ramsey home? To me, that is so odd. Most perpetrators will plan their attack, and this was a very deliberate attack. If, you know, it was an intruder, you'd think that he would bring his own stuff with him, that he would write the letter beforehand so that he could get in and out. Most kidnappers aren't going to just make themselves at home while they are kidnapping someone's daughter. And if it was an intruder, how has he not been caught all of these years? Is it really possible that JonBenet is the only person that he's harmed? And if he has harmed others, how has he gone undetected for this long? Who could the intruder be? Could it be somebody that had seen JonBenet in a pageant? Could it have been someone who had done that holiday walkthrough tour through their home? It's entirely possible that the killer could have seen JonBenet at one of those events. She was, again, in the public eye a lot. She was dressed up and was in full makeup and looked a lot older than she was. She was definitely made to look more sexualized, unfortunately. So it's very possible that a pedophile in the area might have taken an interest in JonBenet and followed her home. It's very possible that the intruder did that walkthrough during the holiday walkthrough, and he was able to get a general layout of the home and maybe saw JonBenet and decided that he was going to come back and do what he did. It's entirely possible. But then again, when you look at the ransom note and you notice what was the demand in the ransom note, and it was $118,000. So that to me shows that it's somebody who knew John closely, because again, it was very close to his Christmas bonus. If it was a random stranger, that's a very odd coincidence. And if it was someone that John knew, why weren't they caught? because most of the people that were around the Ramseys were interviewed and they were ruled out. The second theory is that someone in the Ramsey family did it. Now, one of the biggest theories that was presented in this was by Detective Steve Thomas, who wrote a book about the JonBenet case, who theorized that Patsy struck JonBenet in a fit of rage after a bedwetting episode and then strangled her to cover up what had happened. He said that Patsy most likely thought JonBenet was already dead because, again, she was completely unconscious at that point and was still breathing but wasn't really showing much signs of life. To back up this theory, Detective Thomas pointed to a lot of evidence in JonBenet's bathroom and also to the urine that was found on her bed sheets. However, there are multiple theories about how each of the family members were involved. Another detective on the case, James Kohler, wrote a book and he said that he believed all 3 of the family members were involved in the crime at some point. I personally strongly believe that JonBenet was asleep when she arrived back home, like Patsy and John said. I don't think she was up running around. I think she went to bed. I do think, however, that Burke wanted a late snack, and I'm not sure if either Patsy made it for him or if Burke did it himself, but I think he wanted the pineapple with milk and the glass of tea. So it could have been either Patsy or Burke because both of their fingerprints were found on the items. But to me, I'm more inclined to think that it was Burke because of the way that the tea was prepared. Usually you would prepare tea in a mug and the tea was in a tall glass. So to me, that's kind of what a child mimicking an adult might do. If he wanted tea, maybe that was the glass he normally drank out of. Again, it was at his normal place where he sat at the table. So to me, it could have just been his routine. He used this one glass and he put the tea in there. I think at some point, JonBenet woke up and was hungry. From what I remember from my research at the party earlier in the evening, JonBenet wasn't feeling very well and only had a plate of cracked crab. So I think it's entirely possible that JonBenet wanted a snack as well and maybe plopped her fingers into the bowl and picked out some pineapple, which is why there was none of her fingerprints found on the bowl. This could have set Burke off into a rage. As we all know, a year earlier he had hit JonBenet with a golf club and was known to have a bit of a temper. Or it's entirely possible that both kids decided to kind of sneak out of their rooms when their parents had fallen asleep and that they wanted to have a snack together. Burke could have prepared it while JonBenet stuck her finger in and took the pineapple. I think it's possible that they could have gone down to the basement to play with their toys. I think that they could have used the flashlight in order to not turn on the lights. And to me, it makes sense that the flashlight was probably what delivered the final blow to JonBenet, and a lot of investigators do believe that as well. When they did further analysis on the flashlight, they noticed that it had been completely wiped out, including the batteries inside. Now, in my opinion, there's absolutely no reason to wipe down batteries in a flashlight unless it was linked to a crime. So I think while they were down there, they might have been playing with toys. Maybe JonBenet got mad at Burke and said she was going to tell on him. Maybe something else happened. You never know with little kids, and Burke just lost it and maybe hit her over the head and did not mean to harm her. I don't think it was an intentional thing whatsoever. I also think that something that James Kohler put forth makes a lot of sense. A lot of people who said that the intruder came in believed that the stun gun was what caused the marks on JonBenet, but Kohler presented a different theory. He said that in Burke's train room there was a piece of the train track that had 2 things, I don't know what to say other than things, but 2 things that were kind of sticking out, and when he matched it up to the 2 circular dots on JonBenet, that it matched perfectly. So he thinks that at some point maybe Burke jabbed JonBenet with that piece of the train set. To me, this makes more sense because they weren't able to really line up any stun guns to the 2 marks on JonBenet. From there, I think the family covered up everything else. I think that they wanted to protect their other child. And to me, the only way that Patsy and John could have stayed together and not turned on one another is if they were protecting their other child, their only other child. I think if it was just Patsy or John, they probably would have flipped on one another at one point. So I think that they were really bound together and wanted to really protect their only son. To me, the Ramseys being involved would definitely make a lot of sense. It would explain why they were acting so bizarre to the police the day that JonBenet was missing and found dead. It would make sense why they refused to sit down with the police for months and why they hid behind lawyers and why they just all in all acted like the police were their enemy. It's just very bizarre. And I also think it explains why they lied about Burke being awake. There was no reason for them to lie, and when you enhance the phone call, you can definitely hear Burke's voice. Again, some people would say that they cannot hear it, but I myself can personally hear Burke talking in the background, and there was really no reason for them to lie about that if there wasn't something that they were trying to hide. So to me, them doing it makes a lot more sense than some random intruder coming into the house who didn't bring anything with him and has somehow never been caught. One thing I do know, if it was someone in the Ramsey family, I do believe 100% that it was an absolute mistake. I don't think it was on purpose or premeditated whatsoever. I think it was completely accidental. I think something happened in that basement and it just went horribly wrong and descended into complete chaos. Unfortunately, I don't think that this case will ever formally be solved. I think that a lot of the investigators that work the case know who did it, and one detective said that the public only has seen 10% of the evidence. So to me, the fact that the Boulder Police Department gave the case to the district attorney's office and said that there was sufficient evidence against Patsy and John pretty much means that they had enough evidence to say that they were very much involved in the crime. Again, this is a total travesty, and there's so much evidence, so it just doesn't make sense how this wasn't solved. I think a lot of it was doomed from the beginning. From the second Patsy made that phone call and from the second police arrived on the scene, they didn't seal off the crime scene. People were walking in and out. Evidence was completely contaminated, and I think it just completely ruined the chance of this case ever being formally solved. So I really hope that justice is found for JONBENET. She was an absolutely beautiful little girl with so much life left to live, and it's absolutely tragic all the way around. So I'm interested to hear what you think regarding this case. If you have any theories, please leave them down in the comments below. Again, I could not put all of the evidence into this video. It was literally so much. If you do have specific questions about this case, leave them in the comments below. I will answer them. I have a lot more information that I just wasn't able to fit into this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up for me and subscribe, and I will see you guys on my next one. Thanks, bye.